The Galactic Academy buzzed with the usual morning chaos as beings from across the known systems hurried to their classes. Among the crowd of purple-skinned Valens, crystalline Thorians, and gas-breathing Nexari, one figure moved almost invisibly through the corridors. Sarah Chen looked unremarkable by any standard. Average height for a human, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard academy uniform that somehow managed to look rumpled despite being freshly cleaned. She carried her datapad close to her chest and kept her eyes down, navigating the massive space station that served as the premier educational institution for the galaxy's brightest minds. The other students barely noticed her. Why would they? Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species viewed them as enthusiastic but ultimately primitive newcomers. Earth's single representative at the Academy was clearly here on some kind of diversity program. Zektar, a towering Valian with skin the color of deep amethyst, barely glanced at Sarah as she slipped into advanced quantum mechanics. His forearms gestured dramatically as he explained to his cluster of admirers how his family's military achievements had secured his place at the Academy. The Valian Dominion has been perfecting warfare for millennia, he boasted, his voice carrying the confidence that came from belonging to the galaxy's most feared military power. My grandfather commanded the fleet that brought the Thorian Confederacy to heel. My father led the campaigns that convinced the Outer Rim worlds to join our sphere of influence. Kresh, a being whose rocky exterior marked him as Thorian nobility, nodded respectfully. Despite their species' historical conflicts with the Valians, everyone understood the reality of power in the galaxy. The Valian Dominion's military might was absolute, their tactical brilliance legendary. Sarah found her usual seat in the back corner, set up her datapad, and began taking notes as Professor Velnash began the lecture on theoretical applications of quantum field manipulation. The equations scrolled across the holographic display with elegant complexity, describing the fundamental forces that made their advanced technology possible. While other students struggled with the mathematical concepts, Sarah's stylus moved steadily across her screen. She didn't participate in discussions, never asked questions, and her test scores were consistently average, perfectly unremarkably average. During the break, conversations turned to the growing tensions in the Outer Rim. Reports filtered in daily of increasing raids by an unknown alien force that had emerged from beyond the galactic edge. Ships disappeared, colonies went dark, and even Valian patrol fleets were found drifting empty in space. Father says the military is concerned, Zektar confided to his circle. These new aliens, they fight differently. Our standard tactics don't seem to work against them. The Shadowborn, whispered Lisa, a delicate Nexari whose gaseous form shimmered with anxiety. They consume everything. Entire worlds stripped bare, populations simply gone. Sarah continued copying notes, but her stylus paused almost imperceptibly. Her dark eyes flickered toward the group before returning to her screen. The Dominion will adapt, Zektar declared with the certainty of youth. We always do. No force in the galaxy can stand against Valian military doctrine. Professor Velnash called for attention, resuming the lesson on advanced field theory. Sarah absorbed every word, every equation, every theoretical possibility presented. Her notes were meticulous, cross-referenced, and annotated with calculations that would have impressed the professor had anyone bothered to look. As the class ended, students filed out in their usual groups. The Valians clustered around Zektar, discussing military strategy and family honor. The Thorians formed their own geological huddle, speaking in their grinding, crystalline language. The various other species maintained their social boundaries, established over centuries of interstellar politics. Sarah packed her materials slowly, waiting for the room to clear. She was always the last to leave, invisible in her routine. As she walked toward the door, her datapad chimed with a message. She glanced at it briefly, her expression unchanged, then deleted it without reading. In the corridor, she passed a holographic news display showing footage from the Outer Rim, burned-out space stations, debris fields where colonies used to be, and the distinctive black ships of the Shadowborn fleet advancing toward the inner systems. Military analysts spoke grimly about invasion timelines and evacuation protocols. The other students watched with varying degrees of concern and excitement. For most, this was distant drama, something happening to other people in other places. They were safe in the academy, protected by layers of Valian military might. Sarah paused at the display for exactly 37 seconds, memorizing details that others missed. The formation patterns of the Shadowborn ships, the specific types of damage to the destroyed stations, the tactical reports scrolling beneath the main footage. Then she continued walking, just another student heading to her next class. Her next stop was military history, where Commander Vexoth, a scarred Valian veteran, taught the accumulated wisdom of galactic warfare. The classroom was filled with eager cadets from military families, all hoping to follow in their ancestors' footsteps. Sarah took the same back corner seat, prepared her materials with the same methodical precision, and began another day of being completely unremarkable. Just a quiet human girl, grateful for her chance to learn among the galaxy's elite. But as Commander Vexoth began his lecture on the fundamental principles of strategic deception, Sarah's stylus moved with particular attention to detail, and in the depths of her dark eyes something flickered that had nothing to do with academic interest, and everything to do with the growing shadow falling across the galaxy. 3 weeks after the first Shadowborn attacks, the Academy's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What began as distant concern had evolved into barely contained panic, as the alien fleet swept through system after system with terrifying efficiency. Sarah sat in the Academy's main cafeteria, methodically eating her lunch while chaos swirled around her. At nearby tables, students huddled over their datapads, sharing increasingly dire news reports. The Shadowborn weren't just conquering territory, they were erasing it. Entire planets stripped down to their cores, populations vanishing without a trace, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to be learning from each engagement. They adapt faster than we can develop countermeasures, Kresh was saying, his rocky features creased with worry. My homeworld's defense grid was supposedly impregnable. The Thorian military engineers spent decades perfecting it. The Shadowborn broke through in 4 hours. Sektar's usual confidence had cracked. His family's military connections meant he received information others didn't, and none of it was encouraging. The Dominion High Command is pulling back to defensive positions, he admitted quietly. They're abandoning the outer colonies to buy time. Time for what? Lissa's gaseous form flickered with agitation. Every fleet that engages them is destroyed or worse, turned to their side somehow. They're not just defeating us, they're converting our own ships. Sarah continued eating, but her attention focused completely on the conversation. Around the cafeteria, similar discussions played out at every table. Fear was becoming the dominant emotion, replacing the casual arrogance that had previously defined Academy culture. Professor Velnash entered the cafeteria looking haggard. The normally composed quantum physics instructor had been pulling double shifts, working with the Academy's research division on potential technological solutions to the Shadowborn threat. He approached a table of his advanced students with the weary expression of someone carrying impossible burdens. Any progress on the quantum disruption field? Asked Jex, a promising Valian student who'd been helping with the research. Velnash shook his head. The mathematics work perfectly in simulation, but every practical application fails. It's as if they can predict our innovations before we implement them. They're not just technologically advanced, they're operating on principles we don't understand. Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully and pulled out her datapad, making what appeared to be casual notes. To anyone watching, she looked like a diligent student recording interesting academic information. There's something else, Velnash continued, lowering his voice. The pattern analysis teams have identified something disturbing. The Shadowborn aren't just random in their attacks. They're specifically targeting systems with the strongest military traditions, the most advanced technology, the greatest strategic value. They know exactly what they're hitting. Inside information? Kresh suggested. Intelligence analysis suggests they're somehow accessing our military databases, our strategic planning, even our classified research. But our security systems show no signs of infiltration. It's impossible. Sarah's stylus moved steadily across her screen, but she wasn't taking notes on the conversation. Instead, she was composing what looked like a message to her family on Earth, full of casual comments about academy life and homesick observations. Hidden within the innocent text, however, was something else entirely. The cafeteria's atmosphere grew heavier as more students received personal messages from home. Evacuation orders for non-essential personnel. military conscription notices for those of age, and increasingly frantic communications from families in threatened systems. My cousin's regiment engaged a Shadowborn scout fleet yesterday, Sektar reported, his voice hollow. 12 ships against 3. Standard Valian tactical superiority should have guaranteed victory. What happened? Several students asked simultaneously. The Shadowborn ships moved like they knew exactly what tactics would be used against them. They anticipated every maneuver, countered every strategy before it was fully deployed. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Sarah finished her message and sent it through the Academy's communication array. To the automated systems monitoring student correspondence, it was just another homesick human writing to Earth. The encryption was so subtle, so perfectly integrated into the innocent language, that even the sophisticated Valian security algorithms didn't detect it. Commander Vexoth appeared at the cafeteria entrance, his scarred face grim. The veteran instructor had been recalled to active duty, preparing to join the desperate defense efforts. Students fell silent as he approached. "I wanted to address the rumors before I leave," he announced, his voice carrying across the large space. "Yes, the situation is severe. Yes, we're facing an enemy unlike anything in recorded galactic history. But remember who you are, what civilizations you represent. The Valian Dominion has never been defeated. The Thorian Confederacy has endured for millennia. Together we've brought peace and order to the galaxy." His words carried the weight of tradition, of countless victories, of civilizations built on the certainty of their own superiority. But beneath the inspirational rhetoric, Sarah heard something else. Fear. The kind of existential terror that came from facing the unknown. "The Academy will continue to operate," Vexoth continued. "Your education remains important. The galaxy will need its best minds to rebuild after this crisis passes." After he left, silence stretched across the cafeteria. The subtext had been clear to everyone present. If the Shadowborn continued their advance, there might not be a galaxy left to rebuild. Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave for her next class. As she stood, her datapad chimed with a response to her message. She glanced at it briefly, the faintest smile touching her lips, then deleted it immediately. Walking through corridors that had once bustled with confident energy, Sarah observed the fundamental change overtaking the Academy. The casual arrogance of galactic superiority was cracking under pressure. Students who had never imagined their civilizations could be threatened were confronting the possibility of extinction. But Sarah walked with the same steady pace she always maintained, seemingly untouched by the growing panic around her. Just another unremarkable human student, quietly attending her classes while the galaxy burned. The Academy's emergency assembly hall had never been so crowded. Students from every species, every system, packed together in unprecedented unity born from shared terror. The Shadowborn fleet had breached the inner defensive perimeter, and 3 major worlds had gone dark in the past 48 hours. Sarah sat in her usual position near the back, unremarkable among the sea of anxious faces. Around her, beings who had never spoken to each other clutched hands across species barriers, finding comfort in the simple fact of not being alone with their fear. Director Kelthan, the ancient Thorian who had led the Academy for over 2 centuries, stood at the central podium. His crystalline form, normally radiating calm authority, flickered with visible distress. Behind him, holographic displays showed the latest tactical situation in stark, terrifying detail. "The Valian High Command has authorized the activation of Protocol 7, he announced, his grinding voice heavy with implications that made the audience gasp. Protocol 7 was legendary, whispered about in military history classes but never implemented. It represented the ultimate strategic retreat, the abandonment of all forward positions in favor of a final defensive stand around the core worlds. In practical terms, it meant writing off entire civilizations to buy time for a last desperate gambit. All non-essential personnel are being evacuated from threatened systems, Kelthan continued. The Academy has been designated a priority Alpha evacuation site. Transport ships will begin arriving within 6 hours to relocate students to safer facilities in the galactic core. The announcement triggered an explosion of voices, panic and relief mixing in equal measure. Students desperately tried to contact families, while others wept at the realization that their homeworlds lay within the abandoned zones. Sarah remained perfectly still, Her datapad balanced on her knees, stylus poised but motionless. To casual observation, she appeared stunned by the announcement, perhaps processing the reality that her human homeworld of Earth lay well within the evacuation zone. "There is something else," Kelthan said, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "Intelligence analysis has revealed disturbing patterns in Shadowborn tactics. They possess detailed knowledge of our military capabilities, our strategic doctrines, even our most classified defense plans. This suggests either massive intelligence infiltration or technological capabilities beyond our current understanding." In the crowd, Zektar stood up. His usual arrogance had been stripped away by weeks of devastating news, leaving behind raw determination. "Director, with respect, how is that possible? Valian military security is absolute. Our encryption methods are mathematically unbreakable." "That assumption is currently being reevaluated," Kelthan replied diplomatically. "What matters now is adaptation. The enemy knows how we think, how we fight, how we organize our defenses. Victory will require tactics they cannot predict, strategies outside conventional military doctrine." Sarah's stylus began moving across her screen, apparently taking notes on this crucial information. Her expression remained appropriately concerned, matching the general mood of focused attention mixed with underlying terror. Professor Velnash appeared beside the director, his exhausted features highlighting the desperate nature of their situation. "We've been analyzing Shadowborn technology based on engagement records," he reported. "Their ships operate on principles that violate several fundamental laws of physics as we understand them. They can alter local spacetime, manipulate matter at the quantum level in real time, and somehow process information faster than light-speed communication should allow." "Magic," someone whispered from the crowd, voicing what many were thinking. "No," Velnash replied firmly. "Technology, advanced beyond our current comprehension, but still technology, which means it can be understood, countered, defeated. We simply need time and the right approach." "Time we don't have," muttered Kresh, his rocky features dark with pessimism. Sarah's attention focused completely on the technical discussion, her note-taking becoming more detailed and precise. Around her, other students struggled to follow the complex physics being described, but her stylus captured every equation, every theoretical possibility, every speculation about Shadowborn capabilities. The director gestured to the tactical displays, showing the current battle lines in stark red and blue. Red dominated the map, pressing steadily toward the galactic core. "The evacuation fleet will require 36 hours to complete student relocation. During that time, we ask for your patience and cooperation. Pack only essential items, maintain communication with your assigned evacuation coordinators, and remember that this facility remains under full Valian military protection." As if summoned by those words, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the assembly hall in pulsing amber as automated systems announced the detection of unknown vessels approaching from the outer system. The crowd's panic reached new heights as students realized that even the academy, supposedly safe behind multiple defensive lines, was now under direct threat. Beings who had spent their lives in comfortable security suddenly faced the possibility of immediate death. Sarah stood calmly, gathering her materials with the same methodical precision she always displayed. While chaos erupted around her, she walked toward the exit with steady, measured steps. Her datapad chimed with an incoming message, which she read quickly before deleting. In the corridor outside, she encountered Commander Vexoth, who had returned from his military assignment to help coordinate the evacuation. The scarred veteran looked haggard, aged beyond his years by the impossible burden of fighting an unwinnable war. "Student Chen," he acknowledged as they passed. Something in his voice made Sarah pause and turn back. "Commander, your homeworld Earth, it's in the evacuation zone," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. We're doing everything possible to protect the civilian populations during the withdrawal." Sarah nodded with appropriate solemnity. "Thank you, Commander. I'm sure humanity will survive whatever comes." Vexoth studied her for a moment, perhaps puzzled by her calm acceptance. Around them, students from threatened worlds wept openly or raged against the unfairness of abandonment. The human girl's quiet dignity seemed almost alien in its composure. "Your species adapts well to difficult circumstances," he observed. "We've had practice," Sarah replied simply. then continued toward her dormitory to prepare for evacuation. As she walked away, Vexoth remained in the corridor, troubled by something he couldn't quite identify. In all his years of military service, he had developed an instinct for recognizing important details that others missed. Something about the unremarkable human student nagged at his consciousness, but he couldn't determine what. The evacuation had been proceeding smoothly until the transport convoy encountered the Shadowborn fleet. Sarah stood in the Academy's main observation deck, watching the battle unfold in the space beyond the massive windows. What should have been a routine withdrawal had become a desperate fight for survival, as 3 Shadowborn vessels materialized from nowhere. Cutting off the escape route around her, students pressed against the reinforced glass in horrified fascination. The Valian escort ships, pride of the Dominion military, engaged the enemy with everything they possessed. Brilliant energy weapons carved through space, quantum torpedoes detonated in blossoms of destruction, and defensive shields flared against impossible geometries of return fire. But the Shadowborn ships moved like living things, flowing around attacks that should have vaporized them, adapting to each tactical maneuver before it was complete. Their weapons defied understanding, seeming to strike targets before being fired, bending space-time around their intended victims. "They're not just winning," Lissa whispered, her gaseous form trembling with terror. "They're playing with them." The largest Valian cruiser, the Eternal Glory, had been the first to engage. Its captain was a legend, veteran of countless campaigns, master of tactical doctrine that had never failed. Sarah watched as his ship performed textbook maneuvers, executing strategies refined over millennia of warfare. The Shadowborn vessel responded by mimicking the Eternal Glory's movements perfectly, like a dark reflection performing the same dance. But where the Valian ship moved with practiced precision, the Shadowborn craft moved with predatory grace, turning the familiar tactics into a trap. "How are they doing that?" Sektar demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Those are classified Valian battle formations. Only senior officers should know them." Sarah's attention focused completely on the engagement, her dark eyes tracking movement patterns, weapon deployments, shield configurations. Her hand moved unconsciously toward her datapad before stopping, recognizing that taking notes during the battle might seem inappropriate. The second Valian escort, Hammer of Justice, attempted a flanking maneuver that had succeeded in 1,000 previous engagements. The Shadowborn ship was already turning to meet it before the captain finished giving the order. Energy beams that should have struck empty space instead found vital systems, as if the enemy knew exactly where the ship would be at each moment. "It's impossible," breathed Commander Vexoth, who had joined the students at the observation deck. "They're not just predicting our tactics, they're anticipating decisions before they're made." The third escort ship, Righteous Vengeance, tried something different. Its captain, perhaps recognizing the futility of conventional tactics, began random maneuvers, abandoning doctrine in favor of unpredictable movement. For a moment it seemed to work. The Shadowborn vessel appeared confused, unable to anticipate chaos, but the reprieve lasted only seconds. The enemy ship adapted even to randomness, finding patterns within chaos, turning unpredictability itself into a weapon. The Righteous Vengeance died in a burst of dark energy that seemed to consume light itself. Students throughout the observation deck wept openly as they watched the symbols of galactic military might being systematically destroyed. These were the ships that had maintained peace for centuries, the ultimate expression of advanced civilization's power. Their destruction represented more than tactical defeat. It was the collapse of everything they had believed about their place in the universe. Sarah remained outwardly calm, but her breathing had quickened almost imperceptibly. Her fingers drummed against her leg in a pattern that might have been nervous energy, but followed a rhythm too precise for random anxiety. The Eternal Glory, badly damaged but still fighting, made a final desperate gambit. Captain Veltarn activated the ship's quantum self-destruct system, attempting to take the nearest Shadowborn vessel with him in a burst of contained starfire. It was a heroic gesture, the kind of sacrifice that military academies taught as the highest expression of honor and duty. The Shadowborn ship simply wasn't there when the explosion occurred. It had moved impossibly to a position that should have been unreachable in the time available. The blast that should have vaporized both vessels instead consumed only the Valian cruiser. its crew's sacrifice rendered meaningless by enemy capabilities that violated the laws of physics. The transport ships, Kresh whispered, pointing toward the civilian vessels that had been attempting to flee during the battle. The Shadowborn craft, having eliminated the military escort, turned their attention to the helpless evacuation fleet. Hundreds of ships carrying thousands of students, faculty, and their families hung motionless in space, their fate sealed by the destruction of their protectors. But something strange happened. Instead of destroying the transports, the Shadowborn vessels simply stopped. They maintained their positions, weapons powered but not firing, as if waiting for something. "What are they doing?" Lissa asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Sarah stepped forward, closer to the observation window. Her reflection in the reinforced glass showed a young woman apparently as confused and frightened as everyone else around her. But in the depths of her dark eyes, something flickered that had nothing to do with fear. The lead Shadowborn ship began transmitting. The message appeared on the Academy's communication systems as a stream of complex mathematical equations, quantum field descriptions, and what appeared to be tactical assessments of every engagement they had witnessed. Professor Velnash, monitoring the transmission from a nearby console, looked up with confusion and growing alarm. It's a technical analysis. They're explaining exactly how they defeated each ship, down to the quantum level. They're teaching us how they won. Why would they do that? Commander Vexoth demanded. They're not teaching us, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible but somehow carrying clearly in the sudden silence. They're communicating with someone. Every head turned toward her. The unremarkable human student who had remained silent throughout months of increasingly desperate crisis had finally spoken, and her words carried uncertainty that seemed out of place. "What do you mean?" Vexoth asked, his military instincts focusing on the anomaly she represented. Sarah remained facing the window, watching the Shadowborn ships maintain their holding pattern around the trapped civilian fleet. "The transmission isn't meant for us. It's a response. Someone asked them to demonstrate their capabilities, and they're providing a detailed report." The implications of her statement hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. If the Shadowborn were communicating with someone, if their attack on the evacuation convoy had been requested rather than randomly encountered, then everything they thought they understood about the invasion was wrong. That would mean, Velnash began, then stopped as the full meaning became clear. Sarah turned from the window to face the group, her expression showing the same quiet calm she had maintained throughout her time at the Academy. But now something else showed in her features: authority. The kind of absolute certainty that came from complete knowledge. "It means," she said with devastating simplicity, "that someone has been coordinating with them from the beginning." The silence in the observation deck stretched like a taut wire as the implications of Sarah's words sank in. Commander Vexoth stepped forward, his scarred features hardening with the suspicion that came from decades of military training. "Student Chen," he said carefully, "that's a very specific conclusion to draw from a transmission we barely understand. What makes you so certain?" Sarah remained facing the window, watching the Shadowborn ships maintain their precise formation around the trapped civilian fleet. "Pattern analysis," she replied simply. "The attack timing, the tactical choices, the specific demonstration of capabilities. This wasn't an encounter. It was a performance." Professor Velnash looked up from his console, his expression troubled. "The transmission contains detailed technical specifications about our defensive systems, information that should be classified at the highest levels, but it's presented as if someone specifically requested this data." Around the observation deck, students exchanged frightened glances. The idea that someone within their own civilization might be collaborating with the Shadowborn was almost too terrible to contemplate. It meant that every defeat, every lost world, every dead fleet might have been orchestrated from within. "Who would do such a thing?" Zektar demanded, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Who would betray their own species, their own civilization?" Sarah turned from the window, and for the first time since arriving at the Academy, she allowed her true self to show. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her movements became precise and purposeful, and her eyes held the kind of calculating intelligence that comes from seeing several moves ahead in a complex game. "Someone who understands," That this war was never meant to be won, she said calmly. Someone who recognized that the galactic military-industrial complex had become so focused on maintaining power that it forgot how to actually protect people. Commander Vexoth's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, trained reflexes responding to a threat he couldn't quite identify. Student Chen, you're speaking as if you have inside knowledge of military planning. I do, Sarah replied with devastating simplicity. The admission hit the gathered crowd like a physical shock. Students who had barely noticed her existence for months suddenly saw her clearly for the first time. The quiet, unremarkable human girl who had attended their classes, eaten in their cafeteria and walked their corridors in invisible anonymity. Impossible, Velnash whispered. You're a student. Your records show you're from Earth, enrolled in standard academic programs, no security clearances, no military connections. Sarah smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. Where before she had seemed merely pleasant and forgettable, now she radiated the kind of quiet confidence that came from absolute control of a situation. Sarah Chen doesn't exist, she said matter-of-factly. She's a construct, a carefully designed identity created to provide access to this facility. I needed to understand how your military thought, how your tactics developed, how your strategic planning functioned. Zektar backed away from her, his forearms spreading in a defensive gesture. You're Shadowborn. You're one of them. No, Sarah replied, shaking her head. I'm something much worse from your perspective. I'm human. The statement seemed absurd until the full implications began to penetrate. Humans were newcomers to galactic civilization, primitive by the standards of the established powers. Earth had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago, and their single representative at the Academy was clearly there on sufferance rather than merit, except that everything about that assumption was apparently wrong. The Shadowborn aren't the real threat, Sarah continued, her voice remaining calm despite the growing tension in the room. They're a catalyst designed to expose the fundamental flaws in galactic military doctrine. Every engagement, every defeat, every tactical failure has been carefully orchestrated to demonstrate a simple truth. Your civilizations have become so comfortable with supremacy that you've forgotten how to actually fight. Commander Vexoth drew his weapon, the energy pistol humming to life in his hands. You're under arrest for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against galactic security. Sarah regarded the weapon with mild interest. Commander, that won't help. And more importantly, we don't have time for this. The Shadowborn fleet is maintaining position because they're waiting for my signal. I can either tell them to withdraw and allow the evacuation to proceed, or I can let them demonstrate what happens to civilizations that refuse to adapt. You're bluffing, Vexoth said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Sarah pulled out her datapad and showed him the screen. Instead of student notes, it displayed what was clearly a tactical interface, showing real-time positions of every ship in the system, including several that hadn't appeared on the Academy's sensors. 3 additional Shadowborn vessels are cloaked beyond your detection range, she reported matter-of-factly. 47 human ships are positioned throughout this system, all equipped with technology your species won't develop for another century. And approximately 12,000 human operatives have been integrated into various levels of galactic military and political structures over the past 20 years. The numbers were staggering, implying a level of infiltration and preparation that dwarfed anything in recorded history. But more than the scope of the operation, it was Sarah's casual delivery that truly unsettled everyone present. Why? Lisa asked, her gaseous form flickering with distress. Why would humans do this to us? We welcomed your species into galactic civilization. We shared our technology, our knowledge, our culture. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing something that might have been genuine regret. Because welcoming us into your civilization meant forcing us to accept your limitations. Your military doctrine, your political structures, your entire approach to problem-solving assumes that certain things are impossible, but humans have a different perspective on impossible. She gestured toward the window, where the Shadowborn ships continued their patient patrol around the trapped civilian fleet. Those vessels aren't alien technology. They're human ships, designed using principles your physicists dismissed as theoretical nonsense. The crews aren't shadowborn monsters. They're human volunteers who understood that sometimes you have to become the monster to protect what matters. Professor Velnash stared at his console in growing horror as new data streams appeared. Technical specifications, tactical reports, strategic assessments, all flowing from sources that had been invisible moments before. The quantum disruption fields we've been trying to develop, he whispered. The mathematical models that never worked in practical application. You've been sabotaging our research. Not sabotaging, Sarah corrected. Guiding. Every failed experiment taught you something important about the limitations of your approach. Every tactical defeat showed you weaknesses in your doctrine. We've been providing the galaxy's greatest military minds with the most comprehensive education in warfare they've ever received. And now? Commander Vexoth asked, his weapon still, trained on her, but his voice heavy with the recognition of futility. Sarah looked back out at the stars, where the fate of thousands hung in the balance between human ambition and galactic pride. Now we find out if anyone was paying attention during class. The tension in the observation deck reached a breaking point as Commander Vexoth maintained his weapon's aim on Sarah while trying to process the impossible scope of what she had revealed. Around them, students and faculty struggled to reconcile the quiet classmate they had ignored with the architect of galactic civilization's greatest crisis. You're telling us, Vexoth said slowly, that humanity orchestrated this entire war? That every death, every destroyed world, every military defeat was part of some human plan? Not a plan, Sarah corrected, her tone remaining frustratingly calm. An intervention. Your civilizations had reached a stagnation point, Commander, comfortable in your superiority, certain of your invincibility but completely unprepared for actual threats. The Shadowborn campaign was designed to shake you out of that complacency before something truly dangerous arrived. Something more dangerous than extinction? Kresh demanded, his rocky features grinding with barely contained rage. Sarah's expression became genuinely grave for the first time. The Shadowborn fleet represents approximately 1% of humanity's actual military capability. We built them using deliberately limited technology, following tactical doctrines that mirror known threats from beyond the galactic rim. Think of them as a vaccination, Commander, a controlled exposure to danger designed to build immunity. Professor Velnash looked up from his console, his face pale with the implications of the data streaming across his screens. The technical specifications you've been sharing. They're not complete, are they? These quantum manipulation systems, the space-time distortion drives, you've been showing us primitive versions. Educational models, Sarah confirmed, advanced enough to demonstrate principles your physics had dismissed as impossible, but limited enough to be eventually defeated by properly motivated opposition. The real question is whether anyone learned the lessons we were trying to teach. Zektar stepped forward, his aristocratic composure cracking under the weight of revelation. My family, my homeworld, billions of aliens died in your educational demonstrations. How do you justify that? For the first time, Sarah's calm facade showed genuine emotion. Pain flickered across her features, quickly suppressed but unmistakably real. I can't justify it, Zektar. Every death weighs on us. But the alternative was worse. Far worse, and what alternative? Vexoth pressed. Sarah walked to the central holographic display and activated controls that shouldn't have responded to her access codes. The tactical map expanded to show not just their local system, but the entire galaxy and beyond. At the very edge of the display, barely visible markers indicated something approaching from the void between galaxies. The Devourers, she said simply, a civilization that consumed its own galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago. They've been crossing the void ever since, following quantum signatures generated by advanced technology. Our calculations indicate they'll reach the galactic rim in 18 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the station system seemed muted by the enormity of what Sarah had revealed. The Devourers make the Shadowborn look like a minor training exercise, Sarah continued. They don't conquer or convert. They consume. Matter, energy, information, consciousness itself. Everything becomes part of their collective until nothing remains but empty space and the hunger for more. Velnash stared at the display with the expression of someone watching his own execution. How long have you known? Humanity detected the initial quantum signatures 23 years ago, shortly after we achieved faster-than-light travel. Our first deep space exploration missions found the remnants of consumed galaxies, analyzed the patterns, and calculated the threat vector. We had less than 50 years to prepare the entire galaxy for a war, unlike anything in recorded history. So you decided to start your own war? Vexoth accused. We decided to teach, Sarah replied firmly. The established galactic powers had spent millennia perfecting warfare against known threats, fighting enemies that followed predictable patterns. The Devourers operate on principles that would have made your entire military philosophy useless. We needed to force adaptation, innovation, and most importantly, cooperation. She gestured to the tactical display, where the Shadowborn ships still maintained their patient formation around the trapped civilian fleet. Every engagement has been a lesson in unconventional warfare. Every defeat has demonstrated the limitations of traditional tactics. Every technical revelation has pushed your scientists toward breakthroughs they would never have achieved in peacetime. Kresh moved closer to the display, studying the approaching threat markers with the kind of focused attention that came from finally understanding the true scope of their situation. These Devourers, how do we fight them? With technology that didn't exist 5 years ago, Sarah replied. With tactical doctrines that your military commanders would have dismissed as impossible. With cooperation between species that had never worked together as equals. The Shadowborn campaign has forced all of those developments. At the cost of billions of lives, Lisa whispered. To save trillions, Sarah countered. The preliminary engagement with the Devourers would have resulted in the complete extinction of galactic civilization within months. Now, with the technologies developed during the Shadowborn crisis, with the tactical innovations born from desperation, with the unprecedented cooperation forced by shared threat, we have a chance. Commander Vexoth slowly lowered his weapon, the military man in him recognizing strategic necessity, even as the person in him recoiled from the moral implications. What chance? Sarah's smile was grim but genuine. 47% probability of successful defense, assuming full cooperation between all galactic powers and immediate implementation of the countermeasures we've been developing. Without the Shadowborn crisis, without the forced adaptation, without the technologies born from desperation, the probability would have been 0. She turned back to the window, where the patient Shadowborn ships waited for her signal. The demonstration is complete, Commander. Your military forces have learned to adapt. Your scientists have breakthrough technologies, and your politicians have experienced the cooperation necessary for species survival. The question now is whether you'll choose to use those lessons. Vexoth joined her at the window, studying the alien ships with new understanding. The Shadowborn crews, you said they were human volunteers? Men and women who agreed to become the galaxy's boogeyman, Sarah confirmed quietly. They knew they would be hated, feared, blamed for every death necessary to force adaptation. They accepted that burden because someone had to. And you? Sarah's reflection in the reinforced glass showed a young woman carrying the weight of impossible decisions. I volunteered to be the teacher nobody wanted, to sit in your classrooms, observe your thinking, understand your limitations, and design lessons that would force growth. I've watched civilizations I've come to respect, struggle with challenges I helped create. I've made friends who would kill me if they understood what I really was. She touched her datapad, and throughout the system, Shadowborn ships began powering down their weapons. The demonstration was ending, the lesson complete. The evacuation fleet will be allowed to proceed, she announced. The Shadowborn will withdraw to the outer rim and begin converting their operations from invasion to training. In 6 months, when the Devourer advanced scouts arrive, you'll understand why everything we've done was necessary. And Earth? Felnash asked quietly. Earth never existed as you understood it, Sarah replied with a sad smile. By the time your species achieved faster-than-light travel, humanity had already spread across 1,000 hidden worlds, building the infrastructure necessary to fight a war for galactic survival. The primitive planet you welcomed into your civilization was just another cover story, another way to infiltrate and understand the enemy we needed to save. The observation deck fell silent as everyone processed the true scope of humanity's deception. Not just the Shadowborn campaign, but their entire introduction to galactic civilization had been an elaborate infiltration operation designed to position them for the real war to come. 6 months later, the galaxy had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable before the Shadowborn crisis. The observation deck of the Academy, now converted into a joint command center, buzzed with activity as beings from every known species worked together with unprecedented cooperation. Sarah stood at the central tactical display, no longer hiding behind the mask of an unremarkable student. Her true identity had been revealed to galactic leadership, and she now served as humanity's primary liaison in the greatest military cooperation in recorded history. Commander Vexoth approached the display, his scarred features showing the strain of months spent preparing for the unthinkable. "The Devourer advanced scouts just entered the outer rim detection grid," he reported. 12 vessels moving in formation patterns that match your projections exactly. "How are the combined fleets responding?" Sarah asked, studying the tactical readouts that showed the culmination of everything they had worked toward. "Better than expected," Vexoth admitted grudgingly. "The quantum disruption fields are functioning at 93% efficiency. The adaptive tactical algorithms are successfully countering Devourer movement patterns, and the species cooperation protocols are holding under combat stress." Around them, the command center hummed with controlled energy as Valian tactical officers worked alongside Thorian engineers. Nexari navigators coordinated with human strategists, and dozens of other species contributed their specialized knowledge to the common defense. Professor Velnash looked up from his technical station, his expression showing amazement rather than the terror that had defined the early days of Crisis. "The breakthrough physics are working perfectly," he reported. "Space-time manipulation, quantum field generation, matter-state conversion, all the technologies we thought were impossible 6 months ago are functioning within acceptable parameters." Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on the larger strategic picture. The advanced scouts were just the beginning. Behind them, barely detectable at the extreme range of their sensors, came the main Devourer fleet. Millions of ships, each one capable of consuming entire solar systems, approaching with the inexorable patience of a force that had already devoured one galaxy. Zektar approached from the communications station, his aristocratic bearing now tempered by months of working alongside species he had previously considered inferior. "The human reserve fleets are moving into position," he reported. "I have to admit the coordination is impressive." 40,000 ships, Sarah confirmed, each one equipped with technology we've been developing in secret for decades. "But numbers won't win this war. Adaptation will." Kresh joined the group around the tactical display, his rocky features showing the kind of focused determination that came from finally understanding the true stakes. "The defense grid is reporting anomalous readings from the advanced scouts. They're not behaving according to our projections." Sarah studied the data streams, her expression becoming thoughtful rather than concerned. "They're learning from our defensive measures." "That's expected. The question is whether we're learning from their adaptations fast enough to stay ahead." The past 6 months had been a revelation for everyone involved. The technologies forced into existence by the Shadowborn crisis had proven their worth. But more importantly, the cooperative frameworks developed under pressure had created something unprecedented in galactic history. Species that had maintained careful diplomatic distances for millennia were now sharing their most classified research, their deepest military secrets, their fundamental approaches to problem-solving. "Contact from the advanced scouts," reported Lissa from the communications array, her gaseous form flickering with controlled excitement. "They're transmitting something." The message appeared on the central display as a complex stream of mathematical equations, quantum field descriptions, and what appeared to be tactical assessments. But unlike the Shadowborn communications, this transmission carried an undertone of something that chilled everyone present. Hunger. Vast, patient, eternal hunger that viewed entire civilizations as nothing more than resources to be consumed. "They're analyzing our defenses," Velnash translated, his voice tight with concentration. "But they're also doing something else. They're cataloging us. Every species, every technology, every tactical innovation. They want to understand exactly what they're about to consume." "Let them look," Sarah said calmly. "We want them to understand what they're facing." Vexoth turned from his tactical console with surprise evident on his scarred features. "The advanced scouts are withdrawing. They're falling back toward the galactic rim." "Impossible," Kresh protested. "Devourers don't retreat. According to the intelligence data, they consume everything in their path." Sarah's smile was grim but satisfied. They don't retreat from prey, but they do reassess when they encounter predators. The tactical display updated to show the Devourer advanced scouts moving away from galactic space, their formation patterns showing what could only be described as caution. Behind them, at the very edge of sensor range, the massive signatures of the main fleet had also paused in their approach. The demonstration was successful, Sarah announced to the command center. They came expecting to find another galaxy of passive civilizations, species that would resist according to predictable patterns, technologies that followed conventional limitations. Instead, they found something unprecedented. She gestured to the command center around them, where beings from dozens of species worked together, with an efficiency that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. They found a galaxy that had learned to adapt, to innovate, to cooperate on a scale that matches their own collective consciousness. Commander Vexoth studied the retreating enemy formations with professional appreciation. How long before they return? Unknown, Sarah replied honestly. They'll need time to analyze what they observed, to develop countermeasures for technologies they didn't expect, to plan approaches that account for unprecedented cooperation between their intended prey. Months, possibly years, and when they return, Sarah's expression became serious. When they return, we'll be ready. Not just with better weapons or stronger defenses, but with something they've never encountered before. A galaxy that learned to fight as one, that chose adaptation over stagnation, that proved willing to sacrifice comfort for survival. She turned to address the entire command center, her voice carrying to every species present. The Shadowborn campaign was preparation. This encounter was graduation. You've all passed the test that will determine whether galactic civilization survives the coming darkness. Zektar approached with a datapad showing casualty reports from the crisis months. The cost was enormous. Billions died, entire worlds were lost, civilizations were shattered, and trillions will live, Sarah replied quietly. The galaxy that exists today, the cooperative, adaptive, innovative civilization we've built together, has the tools to survive what's coming. The galaxy that existed before the crisis would have been consumed in months. Professor Velnash looked up from his console with something approaching wonder. The technological breakthroughs alone have advanced our capabilities by centuries. Quantum manipulation, space-time engineering, matter-state conversion, all born from the desperate need to survive impossible threats. More importantly, added Lissa, we learned to work together. Species that hadn't cooperated in millennia are now sharing everything. The barriers between us dissolved under pressure. Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on the tactical display where the Devourer fleet continued its strategic withdrawal. That cooperation will be tested again. The Devourers will return with new strategies, new technologies, new approaches designed to counter everything they observed. When they do, survival will depend not on any single breakthrough, but on our ability to continue adapting together. She touched her datapad, sending signals to human fleets positioned throughout the galaxy. Ships that had masqueraded as Shadowborn raiders began powering down their deception systems, revealing their true nature as humanity's contribution to galactic defense. The masquerade is over, she announced. Humanity takes its place as an equal partner in galactic civilization, no longer the primitive newcomers who needed protection, but the species that taught the galaxy how to survive the impossible. Commander Vexoth extended his hand in the human gesture of respect, his scarred features showing genuine admiration. Welcome to the galaxy, humanity. Thank you for saving us from ourselves. Sarah accepted the handshake, but her gaze remained fixed on the stars beyond the observation windows, where somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, an ancient hunger recalculated its approach to prey that had unexpectedly become predators. Thank you for learning the lessons, she replied. Now let's prepare for the final exam.